John Manley is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Business Council of Canada and is a former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada as well. He joins us to discuss the United States and Canada's relations on all things economics. Welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Let me ask you sort of to scale this for us on a scale of 1 to 10. If 10 is completely optimal, what is the current nature of the relationship between the two countries? I know it's robust, but where would you put it on that scale?
Well, on a variety of things, it's great or it's less than great. I think that we've had, over the last few years, we've had a bit of a disconnect between the heads of government. That tends to reflect its way back into the rest of the relationship. It doesn't dramatically change it, but it does make it harder for us to do things together on the world stage. It makes it harder for us to manage some of our bilateral relations as effectively. And so it's been less than optimal. New Prime Minister in Canada, a lot more tuned in, I guess, ideologically to President Obama. Maybe we launch a new phase.
Could you give us an example of one of the areas where we've been out of sync during the last couple of years?
Pipelines.
I was expecting that, but I didn't want to give a leading question.
I mean, and even Mr. Trudeau, the new Prime Minister, came to Washington as an opposition politician and said, you know, I want you to know I'm a Liberal politician from Canada and I'm for Keystone XL. In the time that it took for the United States government to refuse that pipeline, it approved 400 others. So it was taken, maybe it became a bit of a symbol of something else, but it was taken a little bit personally by the Canadian government, not surprisingly by the Prime Minister himself. He considered it to be his top priority and couldn't get any traction on it in the United States with the administration. So of course that reflected on it. I think, though, in other ways, you know, the President and Prime Minister Harper launched Beyond the Border initiative. Pretty good, but we haven't really seen it, you know, deliver very much yet. We all have hopes that a meeting between Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Obama will yield some other results on the border. So it's an ongoing issue. On energy, can we get an energy outlook that really is, if not continental, at least Canada-U.S.? There are a bunch of issues where we could probably do better.
So, speaking of that upcoming meeting, we're taping this recording on the 7th, and so in just a couple days, Prime Minister Trudeau arrives in Washington. So specifically, do you know of anything that will be at the top of that agenda, or maybe another way is things that you'd like to see at the top of that agenda?
Well, certainly I think border and pre-clearance of both goods and people at airports will be at the top of the agenda. I think that we may see some progress that we haven't seen in a while on some of those items. Information sharing will be one of the asks from the United States. I think we may see some willingness to deal on that by the Canadian government. So that's all good. There will probably be some kind of discussion around softwood lumber. There's been an agreement in place for the last 10 years. It's run out. Bad for us. It runs out at a time when the Canadian dollar is low. If it had run out 2 years ago when the Canadian dollar was at par, probably wouldn't have been much of an issue, but the dollar goes down, Canadian imports come in. First tariff, by the way, on softwood lumber was coming in from Canada was imposed in the first presidential term of George Washington. So a little bit before your time and mine, but that's how long these issues seem to percolate. They don't make us, you know, enemies.
Right.
But
they need to be worked out.
They need to be worked out. We have a big, long border, a complex relationship, and there's always pushes and pulls and strains.
Looking ahead, not as far ahead as we looked back with George Washington, but looking ahead of trend lines, things developing, I think of a couple things when it comes to North American cooperation, not just U.S.-Canada. We'll throw Mexico into the mix as well. The normalization of relations with Cuba and the United States, the rise of China. What are some things in the trend lines that economic development becomes even more important as we see the globe changing?
Well, I think what we've been seeing over the last number of years is a lot of movement in Europe. As they've added more countries, they've become a very cohesive market that rivals North America, and we've seen Asia, both China rising, but a great deal more coordination among Asian nations as well. China rising and India rising as well. So what's happened in North America? I mean, we have NAFTA, which was came into effect in 1994, and we haven't changed it since. So I think it's a time for...
Does it need an update?
Well, I would think so. It was state of the art in 1994. You know, you and I were commenting. The iPhone came out in 2007.
Right.
You know,
it's a long time.
We have lists of occupations under the NAFTA that you can get visa status across the border for. Well, some of those occupations are completely out of date now. Many that exist are not on the list. So there's a lot of things that we could update in NAFTA if we had the will and the means to do it.
Final thought on your trip here. What are some of the issues that you're going to be discussing with folks and things that you're more focused on?
Well, we're certainly going to have a lot of focus on border issues. You know, for Canadian businesses, having some kind of recognition of who are the trusted traders, who are the trusted employers, so that we can facilitate movement of goods, services, and people across the border is really a top of the list thing. That's not a Canadian ask or an American ask. That's one of the things that this just makes our North American economy that much more effective, that much more fluid, and I think that benefits everybody.
Great. Well, John Manley, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure for being here.
Pleasure.